We welcome you to this webinar on water-related impacts of cover cropping in California. We are very glad you've joined us today. With my colleagues, Doctors Alyssa DeVincentis, Daniele Zaccaria, and Samuel Sandoval-Solis, and PhD candidate Anna Gomes, we are pleased to share with you what we have learned from our research on potential benefits as well as the implications of cover cropping with respect to soil water storage across a variety of situations and settings, and to then put our learning in the overall context of SGMA. We have been at this work for a rather long time, as can be seen here. Our goal has been to develop science-based information on what are widely known as conservation, or more currently, regenerative or soil health management cropping systems, with various aspects of cover cropping, as seen on the left, as being an important part of these systems. Our generally intended audience this morning for this webinar is the many and various stakeholders of local groundwater sustainability agencies. But we also expect that our work has direct relevance to anyone who is looking to learn more about how cover crops may influence Central Valley cropping systems and the water cycle. Our work that was conducted over a 3-year period from 2016 to 2019 at 10 different sites throughout the Central Valley has a direct overlay with much of the area under SGMA. And we hope that the information that we will discuss today may help SGMA stakeholders implement their local plans. Dr. Alyssa DeVincentis will now start a discussion off.
I'm going to start off with the main conclusions today, which we'll walk through one by one. The main message we want to share is very focused on winter cover crops. But even within that focus, there are significant differences between crop systems. We'll go over these differences, but an important takeaway is that despite the system, our group's collective research shows that cover crops in California's Central Valley are generally not using water and can provide significant medium and long-term benefits to farms throughout the state. So first, I want to emphasize that we're talking about cover crops grown during the winter season, which in California is the cool and normally wet season. Winter cover crops are grown between November and March in the off-season between cash crops, which is the time period that's highlighted here and displays the annual weather data from Fresno, California. Importantly, this time of year is when the temperature is lowest, resulting in the least evaporative demand. So although plants are growing, the weather conditions don't result in a lot of plant water use. The overwhelming majority of cover crop practices in California occur in this winter time period. Now, although we're focused on wintertime cover crops, not all winter cover crops are created equal, and they shouldn't be treated as the same thing. So cover crop species can vary widely depending on a farmer's management goals. Tall mixes of peas and oats can add substantial biomass to your soil, and low-lying grasses can suppress weeds and scavenge nitrogen. Additionally, we need to consider that cover crops cannot be considered as a sole practice. They must be either tilled in or carefully managed in a no-till environment, which will affect their water impact. These results in the middle column come from a long-term study over 20 years, where we compared cover crop and tillage systems. The x-axis is inches of water that were different between the treatments. And the most difference was seen in blue in the middle when you compare standard tillage without cover cropping to reduced disturbance with a cover crop. This is the greatest difference, and it's important to note that the magnitude is just a third of an inch of water. Lastly, the management history of the fields needs to be considered when calculating water use of a cover crop. These results are from a study conducted in Solano County with 2 fields with different management history, but only a mile or so apart from one another. The light blue farm had been cover cropped for a decade, while the blue field was newly cover cropped for the experiment. With soil moisture increasing as you go down the soil profile in light blue, you can see the long-term benefits of cover crops can be significant. A host of long-term research shows that it takes time to accrue benefits from cover cropping. In the long-term study referenced here, these differences were seen starting after 8 years.
Although each of those factors will have an impact on cover crop water use, they are generally not substantial users, as shown by these graphs. So on the left, we have the actual evapotranspiration of cover crop and non-cover crop fields during the 2017-2018 dry year. And the top graph shows the data from Davis field site. And the one at the bottom, it shows the data from 5 points. We have different colors. The green, the gray is the reference evapotranspiration, a well-watered grass. Then the green is the actual evapotranspiration of winter cover crops and the one of that of control. So from the graph on the left, there are two main conclusions. The first one is that although there are different climates in these two field sites, the difference of actual evapotranspiration is negligible. On the x-axis, you can see the winter cover crop season. So we're talking from mid-November to almost March. And on the y-axis, you're seeing the cumulative evapotranspiration in millimeters. 50 millimeters typically adds to 2 inches. So there is no significant, the difference between the green and the brown, the winter cover crop and the control, reference actual evapotranspiration is not that much. And the second one is that even though it is nothing growing in the field in the winter time, there is water loss through evapotranspiration. So adding a cover crop during a dry year does not increase the actual evapotranspiration by any substantial amount. Now, on the right, on the graph on the right, we look at 10 fields and group them into 3 different systems as shown in the x-axis. We figure out that when the soil was saturated in the winter and look at the end of the cover crop's life cycle and calculated the fraction of that how much water was left, the soil moisture at the end of the cover crop life cycle. And you can see that there is no statistical difference between the cover crop and the control plots. These data cover a spectrum of water years in California, with the wettest year in 2016, 2017, back to the drought 2017, 2018, and then again another above normal year 2018, 2019. It is important to mention that the precipitation that fell during the data collection period, because abundant and frequent rain, can increase evaporation from bare ground, whereas scarce rain will increase the effect of cover cropping on water use. We want to emphasize that these are all winter time data. So we're talking about how much water the cover crop uses itself. All of this information is given by the reference here, that is a peer-reviewed publication.
As Sam and Alyssa just presented, as seen as our research, winter cover crops don't use a substantial amount of water in the wintertime. And yet, having plant cover between and around cash crops can offer numerous medium and long-term benefits year-round. Beginning with soil quality, cover crops create better soil aggregation, porosity, water infiltration, and with improved water storage, you have less surface sealing and crusting and overall higher soil health indicators. The additional organic matter from cover cropping has had prominent impacts on the soil function. As shown here in this video, we can see the importance of soil structure or aggregation that the cover crop soils provide. The soil on the left is protected or increased relative to the non-cover crop soil as found on the right. You can see the difference in soil structure and aggregation as you compare the cover cropped versus non-cover cropped soils. In addition, we have also seen changes in several indicators of biodiversity, with greater diversity related to higher soil carbon, infiltration, and soil aggregation characteristics that result from our cover cropping plots. Our lab determinations of aggregate stability indicate increases with cover crops relative to surface fallow soils, as you can see on the left. On the right, we have data from soil water infiltration studies that show marked increases in the soil's ability to take in water or as rainfall or irrigation. We also have research evidence that cover cropping addresses several overall water management issues in the Central Valley production systems, both in terms of water quality and water quality. As you can see here in these photos, California farmers face several water management challenges. And in areas that receive more rainfall than we get here in the Central San Joaquin Valley, soils that are covered by winter cover crops are protected from disaggregation, surface crusting, and runoff relative to bare soil surfaces. When cover crops are left on the soil surface, they act as a mulch. And our research, as well as considerable work from other studies, has shown that the reduction of about 4 inches of soil water evaporation can occur during a typical San Joaquin summer growing period. This is about 13% of an estimated crop ET of 30 inches. The mechanisms underlying our various assessments of water-related impacts of winter cover cropping are complex, but important aspects of them are shown here. Relative to bare soil surfaces, winter cover crops, yes, have some measure of transpiration, as we've talked about today, but they can also lower soil temperatures, reduce wind speed, and lower ground heat transfer, which all combine to reduce soil evaporation. Raise soil biological activity, can capture dew moisture, and as we pointed out, the overall ET is lower during the winter cover crop growing period. And compared to non-cover crop soils, which also lose water via evaporation, and at times can have crusted surfaces that lead to sealing, ponding, and runoff.
Now we'll discuss how cover crops affect carbon and nitrogen cycles on specialty crop fields. Cover crops have been shown to reduce net soil greenhouse gas emissions, increase soil carbon storage, and improve nitrogen scavenging. Study site in Five Points, California is one of 124 North American long-term study sites that are being monitored and evaluated by the Soil Health Institute. One of the 124 sites is in Five Points in western Fresno County. In this study, the persistent use of winter cover crops has added over 36 tons of organic matter, or the equivalent of 17 tons of carbon, to the soil system, and has produced an average of about 2 tons of dry cover crop biomass during the winter growing period. Lastly, considerable work with cover crops in the Salinas Valley was recently used in advocating for cover crop nitrogen credits as part of their Ag Order 4.0 to the Central Coast Water Board. That Ag Order now includes incentives for the use of compost, organic fertilizers, and cover crops to improve soil health, increase moisture retention, and carbon and nitrogen sequestration. Their recommendation to the board is that when cover crops have a CN, or a carbon to nitrogen ratio, greater than 20, are grown for at least 3 months in the winter rainy period, and that they achieve a dry shoot or above ground biomass of at least 4,500 pounds per acre, that there is low to no risk of nitrate leaching, and that farmers ought to receive a credit for this practice. And as was pointed out in the Central Water Board meeting, providing a carrot rather than a stick in terms of moving toward improved resource management might be a good thing. And as well, the nitrate that is captured by the cover crop will eventually cycle and may be ultimately taken up by the crops such as carrots, almonds, or tomatoes that we all eat.
To round out the discussion of medium and long-term benefits of winter cover crops, we want to point out some additional research that describes how cover crops can improve air quality through the reduction of particulate matter during harvest events, and can improve weed management, provide labor savings, and biological pest control. It's worthwhile to mention the specific interactions between cover crops and pests that growers may be particularly concerned with. Our emphasis is on the word specific. Each crop system, pest organism, and ecosystem service of the cover crop has unique situations. They each require crop-specific research and recommendations based on the location, the crop management schedule, and a grower's objectives and resources. Two examples are noted here, almonds and grapes, two crop systems that have huge geographic and economic footprints in California. In almonds, certain cover crop species can be used to reduce pressure from rodents, nematodes, and navel orangeworm. Cover crop termination strategies and the age of the orchard also affect how a cover crop may impact the pest pressure on almond trees. And in grapes, certain cover crop species can be avoided to interfere with the reproduction of the three-cornered alfalfa treehopper, a vector of red blotch. So based on our research, our main takeaways are once again, we've made an emphasis on winter cover crops. Secondly, not all cover crop systems are created equal. They each have their own unique benefits as well as costs. Generally, cover crops are not a substantial water user, and they have significant medium and long-term benefits. Lastly, growing winter cover crops does not increase water diversions, extractions, and applications to crop fields during normal water years. We work with several farmers who are using cover crops in their production systems now to great advantage. Here's a short video that shows one of them.
So my name is Justin Wiley. We're standing here in the Madera Ranchos, Madera, California, and we're on my pistachio ranch. So the main reasons for the cover crop, my number one goal is more long-term. Short-term, you know, you can make, depending on the mix of cover crop, you do get a little bit of a nitrogen bonus. It helps with compaction. But the main reason for me with cover cropping is the coat of armor and the long-term benefits. What I'm trying to do out here is I'm transitioning this field to organic. I've reduced my inputs. I've reduced my nitrogen by over 90% annually. In the last couple of years, one of the years I did not use any nitrogen at all, only compost. And long-term, the cover crop acts as a shield, a coat of armor for the soil. And the purpose of that is to bring back the soil food web. So I'm trying to increase microbial activity in the soil. An issue with not having any protective armor on the soil is in the summer, the top few inches of the soil will heat up to something like 125, 140 degrees if you get into triple digits. Even a dead coat of armor, even a dead cover crop will keep the soil 20 to 30, 40 degrees cooler. We've actually witnessed that with a temperature gun where the live cover crop on the berms like I have here will be something in a 105 degree day will be something like 85 degrees. A terminated cover crop that is still coating the soil can be something in 105 degree heat might be something like 95 degrees. Bare soil in 105 degree heat, direct sunlight, all direct sunlight would be 140 degrees plus. So you can see major temperature swings if you don't have that coat of armor sitting on the soil. So that's one thing, is to improve the microbial activity in the soil. You know, earthworms, microarthropods, they cannot survive when the soil gets that hot. You know, the earthworms are going to go deeper. Most of your microbial activity is either going to go dormant or die off in that kind of heat. So on top of that, you're not improving the soil structure, you're losing the glues, you're losing fungal activity, you actually get a drying effect, you know, a reverse osmosis effect where you're wicking the water out of the top few inches of the soil. So that ETO formula, we haven't taken into consideration the fact that when we're irrigating, in between irrigations, if you go 4 or 5 days in between irrigation and it's 99 degrees or 105 degrees out, you're actually losing water to evaporation that a cover crop would actually help prevent. And so that's a credit there. Even though you are transpiring during that period of time, you're not evaporating nearly as much because your soil stays much cooler. And so that's something that we need to do more research on to see and to include that in this equation. So that's the first couple of things. The second thing is I'm trying to improve structure. So over a period of time when you have active growing roots in the soil, you are obviously feeding the microbes with different food sources, because the exudates from the plants are not just the trees, not just my pistachio trees, which feed one kind of microbial life, but I'm getting a mix of different plants that feed a variety of microbes, a variety of exudates. So I'm actually encouraging microbial growth in the soil over time as the microbial life cycles, and I get more arthropods in it, microarthropods, earthworms, beetles, things like that. I'm gonna improve the structure of the soil. As the roots die back, I'm gonna leave gaps as the earthworms continue to process soil. I create more pores in my soil, macropores and micropores, where when the rain comes, if I have that soil structure and I've returned the glues to my soil from the fungal activity, the glomalin, I'm going to be able to retain a lot more water. And so on top of that, I'm also improving so not only the structure, I'm increasing soil organic matter. There's a lot of studies out there that show for every 1% increase in soil organic matter, you get 25,000 gallons of holding capacity in my soil. Right now, all of our soils in Madera are sitting at somewhere around 0.5% to 0.75%. I mean, we farm a lot of acreage around here, and we've taken those soil tests on everything we farm. We don't have anything above 0.75%. Now that could be native. If you take a sample on the fence line, it may not be much more than 1.5%, 2%, but we don't have to accept that. There is a way to improve soil organic matter. We've seen that in the Midwest. Not quite as arid of an environment, but we have trees, we have irrigation here. We have every reason to believe that we can improve our soil organic matter over the next 5-10 years. So long term, if I can increase the soil organic matter, that will improve my water holding capacity. When we have a wet year, having soil structure where I can take the water and the infiltration rate increases so that the water doesn't just wash down the canals, improving the soil organic matter in the soil should give me a huge increase in water holding capacity, to the point where I on those wet years, if I get spring rains and winter rains and I start with a full profile, my full profile could be double or triple what my neighbor's is over time if I'm doing all those things. So the point is not just this year and what my cover crop might do in 1 year, it's what can it do in 5 or 10 years if I keep that coat of armor on my soil and I improve the soil structure, improve soil organic matter. What are the long-term benefits of that? So it's hard to look at, a cost-benefit analysis, or am I using more water over 1 year, especially in a drought year when my goals are long-term. So cover crops are an integral part of my operation. Without cover crops, I couldn't do anything else that I'm trying to do. So I'm trying to improve soil structure. I'm trying to improve water holding capacity and increase organic matter. Without that coat of armor on my soil, everything else I'm trying to do, with reducing salt applications in my fertilizer, with compost, with reducing nitrogen use, reducing inputs overall. I'm not applying any fungicides, insecticide, or herbicides in my blocks. Without that, without the cover crop, all the rest of the stuff goes away. Without a coat of armor on my soil, without the ability to cover crop and keep the coat of armor on my soil, everything else I'm trying to do goes away.
So I'm going to bring it back to the reason that you may be watching this webinar today, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. On the left are the explicit goals of SGMA, the things that the policy is meant to prevent. And on the right are the ways that we believe cover crops can impact groundwater management and potentially help GSAs meet their targets. The top 5 goals are all related to water quantity. But as we just showed, we believe that cover crops do not require additional irrigation or the associated groundwater pumping. Cover crops can actually improve on-farm water management through improvements to soil health and water retention, if water arrives to the soil through rain. Otherwise, cover crops can require irrigation in extremely dry years. The last goal is separated because it's uniquely focused on water quality, the second goal of water management. There are unique benefits of winter cover cropping related to water quality that are dependent on the species being grown, but any cover crop will improve erosion control and prevent surface runoff and associated pollution, while specific species may have the ability to actually immobilize potential groundwater contaminants. In addition to the goals of SGMA, we want to comment on the methods of SGMA implementation. It's our understanding that remote sensing may be used to estimate groundwater use within a GSA's command area. However, remote sensing models and techniques provide inaccurate estimates of actual consumptive water use in cover crop systems. Here we cite several studies that support this statement. We find that cover crop coefficients simply don't exist for most parts of the world, including California. And that's because they're difficult to calculate. There are many different kinds of cover crops, as we've discussed today, and they respond differently to climate and farm management. Lastly, common methods used in energy balance models have difficulty distinguishing between cover cropped and bare ground. These are all important because not all green pixels are created equal. The image on the right shows a remotely sensed NDVI photo from a drone flight this past spring. The vineyard had two different ground covers, permanent grass on the left and a resident weedy vegetation on the right. As you can see, these green pixels look identical.
Given all the information we presented here today, we want to end with a definitive recommendation regarding cover crops and SGMA. First, GSAs should not treat winter cover crops as a net consumptive water user. Second, before GSAs adopt any remote sensing model or tool for estimation of actual evapotranspiration, we need more ground truthing against ground data collected with appropriate methods needed to enable more accurate estimates of actual water use for specialty crop systems with winter cover cropping. In addition, we should consider an analysis of uncertainties and errors that may result from using remote sensing-based ET estimates and ways to offset these errors, as well as compare them with the GSA's desired level of ET accuracy. Third, we think well metering, with a 1 to 5% accuracy in water measurement, is the most accurate way to capture groundwater extraction by specialty crop growers. And fourth, farmers should be rewarded and incentivized to grow cover crops using soil moisture from rainfall, which can provide ecosystem services to help meet the GSA's goals.
So we'd like to end with acknowledging our funding sources. The research we shared today was funded by the California Department of Food and Agriculture, the NSF IGERT program at UC Davis, as well as the Almond Board of California. We'd like to thank all of those funders that are listed here on the left, as well as provide our email addresses where you can contact our research group on the right-hand side.